Hi everyone. We have a special guest today, Lauren Sabo, who's an education and special education lawyer here in Columbus, Ohio. And she's going to answer a few questions for us about a very frustrating topic. My child is failing in school. How do I get them some help?
Yes, absolutely. First, don't wait, right? Typically, what I see is it's either grades have already come out, right, for whether it's the quarter, semester, or potentially end of the year, I got a bad grade, right? So there obviously are policies and procedures where if there's something wrong with that grade and you want to appeal it, there's potential in that. I will say that's very hard to do, right? Teachers have a lot of discretion, kind of regardless of whether it's K-12 or college, but there are policies and procedures for a grade appeal. But really, if they get a bad grade, what's led up to that? That's the concern.
That's the big question. So what I'm hearing is that my child is failing, or what's happening is my child has failing grades, but they're allowed to retake them multiple times. So the school says their grades look good, but if I look at their base grades, they're really not their C's and D's and maybe even some F's. So how would I start the process of making the school pay attention to that?
Sure, absolutely. So again, being able to have access first and foremost to their grades. So whether that's that school portal, for college students, obviously it might be a little different. You're asking your student, or they're potentially providing you, with that information. But for K-12, really, it boils down to figuring out what's going on in the classroom, what are they missing, and what are the different policies at that school, because oftentimes their grading policy might be one thing, how they actually put grades in the system is another, and really teacher by teacher. So what I see too is a student might have an F and then, oh wait, they're ineligible for next week's, whatever. Sports or athletic activity or some type of extracurricular, because of grades, but in reality, it's because things haven't been put in the system.
Right.
So, reaching out and really getting a school team meeting is the main thing. So who do you want there at the table? A lot of these meetings are virtual, so it's a lot easier for parents to be able to join during the school day, and really just maybe 30 minutes. But, getting a school administrator involved, I would say the school guidance counselor is somebody really important too, especially as our kids get a little bit older. Because that's the person that is going to be sending those grades off to post-secondary institutions.
Yes, to the college.
Yeah.
So then what would I do to get the ball rolling? Do I write a letter? Do I send an email? What do I do to kind of get going?
Yep. I think email usually is best, right? Just because then it's documented on both sides that you sent the email. So typically sending the email to whether, if it's just one particular class, maybe that the struggle is, starting with the teacher, right? I'm a former high school multi-intensive special education teacher. So, I would always want my students or families to come to me first, and that's important. But it doesn't mean that you can't also include their supervisor. So again, typically it's going to be the principal or assistant principal on that. Getting the guidance counselor involved. I say we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, but I also believe sometimes it's really just that one teacher's doing X, one teacher's doing Y, and the student maybe does well in that class, doesn't do well in this class. But there also might be, some type of underlying disability, or the student is struggling in a certain area. So if that's the case, you want to actually go ahead and put in writing a request for an evaluation for special education under the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And again, it doesn't have to be anything lengthy. It could just be an email to whether it's the special education coordinator, if you already know who that person is. If not, the principal or assistant principal is fine. And just put in a writing, say, here's who I am. You don't have to be the parent or guardian. It could be, you just know this child, you're a mentor or something, but who you are, the student, their name, their grade, and really your concerns. So I'm concerned that, my student is really struggling in math and reading, right? And if that's the case, and then you actually want to, in writing, put that sentence in that says, I am requesting an evaluation for them.
So once I do that, we have a student right now that we did that process, and they did a multi-factored evaluation. Okay, so they went through and kind of reviewed all the different parts of the individual's abilities and achievement and several other areas. But then when they did the ETR or the evaluation, they came back and said, well, we don't think they need it, and we have to close the ETR in 2 days. And my client's mom was just really like, oh my gosh, because it made it sound like there was a legal requirement to do that.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So for whatever reason, I feel like this school year I'm getting a lot of these calls and cases. So first of all, if you're in that situation where whether it's an initial evaluation, so your student is being evaluated, and then you're getting that document called that ETR, Evaluation Team Report. Again, that's usually done by a school psychologist, although there are other people involved in that as well. It's got lots of observations and assessments, academic, social, emotional, just depends on the student. But really requesting a draft in advance, right? So that's the first thing. Now, again, as a former teacher, right, everybody's busy, and I understand, but even, 24 hours in advance so that you have a chance to review it. So you're not going into one of these meetings where, either you really think there's this issue that your student would qualify for special ed, or on the flip side, I've had quite a few clients lately where their student has been on an IEP for 4, 5, 6, 8 years, and have qualified every 3 years. So under the law, there's a reevaluation process every 3 years. You're going to get reevaluated, get that new ETR, and then it's an IEP team decision. So you go through all the data and all the information and say, do they qualify as a student with a disability anymore? So what I'm finding is, for whatever reason, schools are saying, oh, the student who has qualified for many years, has had an IEP, everything's been good, is suddenly not qualifying. And then parents are finding out at this meeting, and like you said, it's like, oh, and you have 2 days to kind of decide, and then we're closing this ETR. So that's not right. That's not exactly how it works. So the ETR, that evaluation team report, is really, that school psychologist and the school's kind of data, documentation, and then ultimately there's something called section 4 at the end, where it's the team decision. So it's going to ask 3 questions and ultimately decide, does the student qualify for special education services? They could have a disability, but then ultimately it might not impact them in the education setting. And if that's the case, then they wouldn't qualify. But if your student doesn't qualify, it's not really where the ETR gets opened or closed, right? There's a computer program, and the district has certain timelines that they have to meet. So that's maybe why they're saying some of this language. But the reality is, it's not like a document that, if parents decide, hey, we disagree with that decision, we think our kid should qualify, right? That it's closed. It's more, that's that document. If you disagree, there's a process under the law called an IEE, an independent educational evaluation. And so you should request that for your child, and that is an outside, independent, neutral provider, psychologist, who the district should have a list of, right? They should have, 1, a board policy about it, but 2, a list of local people. And if you can't get on that list, sometimes we can ask for somebody off the list as well. But that's going to be at the school's cost. So you should request an IE, and then what you do is you have these 2 documents. You have the school's kind of report, and then you have this outside report, and you come back to the table to really go over both.
And see if my child qualifies.
Correct.
So now the other thing is too that sometimes is confusing is the school says, well, they don't need an IEP anymore, they need a 504. And I'm just kind of a little bit confused between the difference. And if my child's still significantly struggling, help me, kind of what route would I take?
Sure. So I don't love when it's a consolation prize, right? When a child doesn't qualify for under IDEA for that IEP. So it's like, oh, we'll give them a 504. I think they're both great plans and things that, certain students should be on IEPs, and other students really only need a 504 plan. So what I tell people, the main difference is that, one, IEPs typically are longer, right? They're more intensive documents. But in terms of, what's in there, the main difference is that a Section 504 plan is only going to give you accommodations. So that literally means, maybe preferential seating, extra time on exams, potentially a calculator use, or other type of materials. It's really just tools. It's not going to provide the student with any type of, individual, one-on-one, what we call specially designed instruction. That's those SDI minutes that are in an IEP that are what students who, might need a little additional support are going to get from an IEP. So it's not that, 504 plans are bad, they're wonderful, and there are some students that will thrive, and that's all they need. But I don't love when it's, hey, you didn't qualify for an IEP, so we're just going to give you this instead. You know, if that's the case, what I end up seeing sometimes are 504 plans that are really robust and have services on them that typically I would say, that actually is a service on an IEP. Yeah.
So then we should really take a good look at the student. And if the parent disagrees, then there's a part, I think I remember on section 4 where you can say, you know, I was here, but I disagree.
Exactly.
And then the district needs to provide them with a list of providers so then they can see if they can get into one of those in order so that we could get a better look at the child's needs.
Exactly. Yep. And one thing that I think sometimes families forget that I do, because the IE process does take time, right? Because you have to find a provider. Sometimes it might be, you know, a couple weeks or even a couple months. So another thing is, there's an area that you feel like didn't get tested in the first place. You can actually kind of, again, it's not opening or closing the ETR. It's just adding another evaluation, right? So we're saying, oh wait, we didn't actually evaluate for executive functioning skills.
Or speech.
Right? Or speech,
yes.
Exactly. So that's something that you can kind of keep the process going, and you can actually still go do an IE if you want. But that's another option of kind of an in-between where it's like, hey, maybe we just need a little bit more data and we didn't quite identify the right areas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Lauren. This is great information, because when you start talking about timelines and this sort of thing, where can our parents and other parents reach out to find, you know, robust information about their rights?
Sure. Well, first of all, they should always be giving you a parental rights handbook, right? But that's from the Ohio Department of Education. And they have great resources. You know, there's some other organizations out there. Rights Law has excellent online resources. A Day in Our Shoes has great website and information as well. As well as, you know, there are complaint options, right? So if you feel like you're not, you know, you've gone all these different routes and you're still not, you know, really seeing eye to eye with the school, your child's not receiving what we call FAPE, you know, there are complaint options through the Ohio Department of Education as well as the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights.
Well, Lauren, this has been great information. Thank you so much, and we appreciate all your time and the great information.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Julieann Ash. I'm the Director of Midwest Educational Therapy and Associates. You can find us at www.metaoh.org. You'll find all of our social media there. Reach out whenever we can help. Thanks.
And my name is Lauren Sabo, and I'm an education and special education attorney here in Columbus, Ohio. I represent students pre-K through PhD all across the state, and you can find me at www.studentlawOhio.com.